We're coming to our closing session as part of this summit, and so I'm going to invite our closing panelists to come join me as I set up this conversation. And so if we could grab Elizabeth Wilkins and Alissa Quart, I am so excited for this next conversation, which is going to really bring this home. And so as I get my device to work, there we go. So as we come to the final session of today's summit, and we have a lot more coming tomorrow, but this has been a lot today. So I kind of want to invite us all to take like a collective breath. This has been a lot of content. We have done a lot of thinking. We have done a lot of processing of a lot of things. And what we're going to end up doing for this closing panel is we're going to zoom right back out. We're going to zoom out from the policy conversations. We're going to zoom out from the what do we do in the next couple of years, and we're going to get back to some of those deeper questions that we started the day with. Questions like what kind of society are we choosing to be? Questions like what do we owe one another? And questions like what time on the clock of the world is it? And what does that mean for the work that we do and how we show up in this moment? And so I'm really excited and honestly, genuinely curious where this conversation is going to go given these two amazing ladies. But I'm really excited to moderate this next conversation with two people who are not really of the policy world. They are people who live at the intersections of policy, of narrative, of strategy, and of storytelling and of cultural meaning making. That's some of how I think about what these amazing women do. And that's Elizabeth Wilkins, who leads the incredible Roosevelt Institute, and you've heard a little bit from a couple of folks at Roosevelt today, and you'll hear some more from some of those fabulous folks tomorrow. And Alissa Quart, who leads the incredible Economic Hardship Reporting Project. And if you don't know about the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, you're doing it wrong. Check it out and find her after class. And also, I should note, Elizabeth comes with, no, actually, I think it's Alissa who comes with her own cheering section today. So Ray Suarez, feel free to cheer loudly from the back and validate what I'm saying about how great the project is. But I'm really excited to have both of these amazing thinkers and leaders and narrative strategists with us to really help us explore what does it look like to meet this moment, not afraid of our own shadows, right, as we've been kind of talking about throughout the day, but with boldness, with moral clarity in a time where I'm going to come back to what I said this morning, when we're living through a battle of imaginations that we really cannot actually afford to sit out, because this is the moment where we're going to be shaping the future of the social contract. And every single person in this room and every single person watching this recording in the future has a role to play in that. So I'm going to make another, hopefully, relatively artful segue from this podium to a chair, and then we're going to start that conversation. First off, I just want to say thank you to both of you for joining us. And I'm really excited to see where this conversation goes, because I think it's going to take us to a lot of places. And it might even take us to talking about tarot, Alissa, based on our conversation last night.
Yes.
Elizabeth's like, oh, now I'm glad I'm here.
I'm interested too. Yeah.
So I want to start with you, Elizabeth, and I want to throw you a question that we were kind of getting into actually in the hallway when we were talking a little bit about this. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit. I'm going to say that we're in a moment where a lot of the energy in policy circles, and a lot of the conversations in policy circles, they get talked about in ways as though everything's really partisan, right? Where it's like, oh, something must be a lefty idea, or oh, something is more of a conservative idea. Is there bipartisanship on this? That was a theme that actually came up in multiple conversations today. And so when that happens, sometimes our policy conversations can get really stuck, right, in what seem like ideological silos. How do you think about the moment we're in when it comes to what the American people actually want from policymakers, and how much of the bipartisanship or the lack of bipartisanship that we perceive often in Washington is actually happening across the country?
So first of all, it is a delight to be here. I got to be here on the 90th anniversary of Social Security, and given that I lead the Roosevelt Institute, that was a particularly special thing to do, so thank you for having me back. I think this is a great question. What country are we in now versus the country that we were in 20, 30 years ago, and what does that demand of us? When I think about the world we are in right now, I absolutely do not think of it as a left-right type of moment. I think of it as a bottom versus top type of moment, which is a very different moment to be in. For a very long time, we have been in a world where the common sense of the world were that there were limits on the amount that you could tax wealthy individuals or corporations, the amount that you could regulate markets towards public ends, the amount to which you could support worker power and still end up with a productive, thriving, prosperous society that everybody could participate in. And I think we are in a pretty clear moment where a wide swath of Americans are rejecting that paradigm. They are saying, just thinking about the last panel, globalization didn't work out for us the way that that everybody said that it would. Trickle-down economics didn't work out for us the way that we thought that it would. We want to live in a world, in a country which has a thick social fabric, where all of us feel like we can participate. We are okay with the idea that we live in an economy where there are sometimes winners and losers, but part of the bargain is that losing isn't so bad and that we take care of each other. And that bargain is broken. It has been broken for the last 50 years, and the terms of that debate are outdated for what people feel like they want to participate in. And as horrifying as some of this moment is, I find that to be an interesting opportunity for something very new. It's an opportunity to listen hard to what it means, what people mean when they say, I would like to participate in thick social fabric, when I want to be part of something, when this is the social bargain that I could be a part of, and to build from there the social insurance system that we need. I think that we really get caught up in Washington in those debates of 20 years ago and the terms of them, when we could be thinking about the debate of the future and taking as a given that there is a huge amount of power and energy around a really different social contract. And, per the last conversation, especially in a time of great social upheaval, that can be a time of great pain, but also a time where the bargain is up for renegotiation. And if we don't sort of recognize I think we've been talking about polling today, the enormously popular base that programs like Social Security have, the enormously popular concept of what it means to contribute to society and what it means to get something back from it. The capaciousness of that idea, I think, is a real opportunity for us to say this is what the social bargain should look like going forward. And again, if we ourselves, myself included, spend so much time in Washington that we get caught up in the debates of the past, we will miss the opportunity to renegotiate that bargain for the benefit of everybody that we care about.
This is a perfect place to bring you in, Alissa, and thank you for grounding us there, Elizabeth. Alissa, part of why I was so excited to bring you into this community, to have you on this panel, and please come introduce yourself to Alissa if you have not already, because the Economic Hardship Reporting Project is amazing and should be partnering with a whole bunch of organizations who are here and a bunch of you in the room. But a big part of why I was so excited to have you here and to really help us close out this day is because you have written and you've really coined a phrase it's a catchphrase that really resonates with me, and I think it'll resonate with a lot of people in this room. It's that insecurity is the new inequality. And I'm going to let that kind of set in for a second. And in that, how economic insecurity has really become the defining feature of American life for so many more people than people who live below or experience periods below some arbitrary, extremely too low poverty line. Talk a little bit about how you came to that conclusion, what that narrative means to you, and why does that matter? Why might that be an important way for us to be thinking about the moment we're in economically and socially when we talk about something like social insurance?
Oh, thank you so much. What a great introduction. Vallas is awesome, by the way. She's been said, and so great to be here with you too. So the way I came up with this concept was, so I run this organization, the Economic Hardship Reporting Project, that was created by the late, great Barbara Ehrenreich. And I created it with her basically 10, 12 years ago. And we put reporters to work, many of whom have fallen below the poverty line, but some of whom are just economically insecure. Formerly had incredibly illustrious careers, and now they've aged out. or they've had some other hardship. And so we've put them to work doing this. And that has taught me a lot about this world of the people who I call the middle precariat, precarious plus proletariat plus middle class. And that, to me, is a growing group of people, many of whom are, I won't say use the social insurance that you're talking about. And it's a way for us to connect across social classes too, I think, to create solidarity. Insecurity, unlike inequality, is less involved in the gap, and it's more interested in what is the similarity, what is the alliance between people at different strata. So to me, it's like a framework that it's kind of a reversing discursive capture that would try to separate people just through inequality and to say, no, look, there's actually, it's kind of what the 99% did back in the Occupy days, but it's a little more sophisticated. So that was sort of my thinking behind Insecurity is the New Inequality. It started with thinking about precarity, but I also think, I call it terra infirma. And I think starting at least with the second Trump administration, probably going even further back than that, we have a lot of economic plus factors. So we're class and so forth, but there's also things like transportation insecurity, citizenship insecurity, informational insecurity, knowledge insecurity. And a lot of them are obviously being manufactured by the Trump administration. But I think there's been pre-existent forms like this, and that income inequality lies on top of them. They're sort of like, they're working in tandem together. And so that, one thing, home ownership, the cost has gone up 50% in the last 5 years. We're getting our information just filled with AI slop. And it goes on from there. We're insecure about what medical research is going to look like, because we've had a huge amount of defunding, what universities are going to look like. And so, I think we can also see what in the effects of that in sort of local elections in New York, in Seattle, Georgia, Maryland. People voters, as you were saying, who locally are not buying into this idea that this is what their lives have to be like, and in fact are sort of inspired to act against their insecurity, to use it to make new electoral choices. So I'll stop there. I have a lot more to say, but yeah, thank you.
Am I allowed to jump in on that a little bit?
You so are, and I was about to say, did you want to jump in?
So there's two things about what you just said that I just really stood out to me about how we think about insecurity and this moment and the opportunities that it provides that I really appreciate. So one is, this might be going too far afield for the conversations that you've had today, but the sort of word of the moment in Washington circles right now seems to be affordability. And I find that to be an interesting and sort of complicated and under-nuanced term but that has got a lot of opportunity in it. Right? So if you poll people over and over, they will say, my costs are too high, my costs are too high, my costs are too high. I think if you actually dig underneath that polling, what you actually find is a feeling of precarity and insecurity. That what actually is going on underneath that is a feeling that what people are living in is in a house of cards, and they can't make it through the next emergency, and they don't have a safety net, and they don't have any breathing room. And there was a really interesting poll, I think the New York Times did it recently, that actually broke down different economic strata of people and what they meant by affordability. And it was actually really different. There was like very, very low income people who were like, I actually mean my groceries. I actually mean like my week to week making ends meet. And then there was a more middle class group of people who meant housing, healthcare, and education. Like I thought that I was going to have a stable middle class life, and I can afford my groceries every week, but I can't afford the life that I thought I was promised if I worked this hard. And I think the idea of this insecurity, precarity, uncertainty, this house of cards feeling that underlies that affordability is a real opportunity for solidarity, as you say, that there is now a much wider swath of people who are experiencing this idea that they cannot put the puzzle pieces together to have a secure and sustainable, reasonable life. That this is not just them over there who, like, maybe something is wrong with them, that they didn't work hard enough, that they don't contribute, that there's a real sense that contribution doesn't count the way it should anymore to deliver that good life. And I see that, as you said, we are in the business of sort of narrative power building. How do you tell the story in a way that more people can see themselves in it so that you create a bigger coalition for change? To me, this is a real opportunity that more and more people are feeling themselves to be insecure, such that the idea of social insurance becomes something both more appealing and more understandable to a wide variety of people.
I love that you started to bridge us to narrative, because that is where I want to go explicitly. And just to say, narrative shift may be one of the most overused buzzwords, not just in Washington, but anywhere right now. But there is actually a kernel of something to it, right? Because the stories we tell are what shape how people think about things, right? And we're all in the business of shifting consciousness if we're trying to shift policy and systems, right? Just to say that. Humans are storied beings. That is how we work. And so I want to get a little bit into narrative, and I want to bring you back in, Alissa, and say you're somebody who works very explicitly at the intersection of journalism and policy, and especially policy failures, right? And you do a lot of what might be called storytelling. I think that might not quite do it justice, but you do it in a way that really shapes the emotional terrain for what people think and feel and maybe even believe might be possible. I'd love to give you a chance to talk about what you think the role of narrative is in either expanding or constraining a policy conversation like many of the ones we've had today.
Well, thank you so much for saying that. I mean, so Ray Suarez, who's in the audience, right? He and I, we did a radio show, 2 seasons. You guys should listen to it, called Going for Broke. The first season was with The Nation, and the second was Wisconsin Public Radio and NPR. And they were both PRX. And what we would do is we would talk to EHRP contributors who were, as I said, many of whom experienced homelessness, worked in grocery stores, had been veterans with mental health problems, and we got them to also talk about not just their administrative burden and the difficulty they had navigating their own lives, but what solutions they themselves would like to see. So one of them had slept in shelters, and the light in the shelter, the light and the sound had kept her awake, and sleeplessness was her major dilemma. So we sort of had her communicate with an architect who specialized in trying to change the contours of those shelters. And so with each episode, we sort of made our contributors into experts in their own lives, which they are, but also experts. And I think one of the things that really bothers me about American journalism is that we have an expert quote. And you read the newspaper and there's a quote, oh, Brookings Institute, okay. And so
we love all the people here from Brookings.
Brookings Institute. No, but I'm sure everyone here wants to be that expert quote. But there is a place, right, for, and my joke is always at J School, there were, one of the teachers called the normal quote from the normal person on the street, AAA, ask any asshole. And then the expert quote was like this heavenly, person that was always going to be somebody that had been quoted by many other people, right? That's how a reporter works. So, but I think it's really important to have people like formerly unhoused people being the expert, not just the subject, not just the kind of like, I am a sufferer, but I'm both a participant and an observer. And that's like Anthro 101, but it's something that we're trying to do. We have a website, workingsources.org, that you can check out, where we started to create some of these folks, a list of these folks, some of like caregivers who are also specialists in daycare, but they run daycare. So I guess that's one of the ways, is to have people who worked at grocery stores writing about surveillance pricing, like Ann Larson, who worked in a grocery store for a year in Salt Lake City, and now she's writing, her book is coming out in April, and it's about the politics of grocery stores, but it's also about her being a working class woman working in a grocery store. She happens to have a PhD. I mean, there are those folks that are at that juncture. I mean, another thing that I think is really important is to try to, reframe some of the language, and I can talk about that later, I think, because that's different from narrative. It's more of a linguistic thing. But yeah, we can get into that.
I think it's important, and I'm going to ask Elizabeth a related question, and then I'd love for you to get into some of those language thoughts. Elizabeth, you were talking a little bit about some of the fact that there's actually a lot of really broad agreement among real people in the country, right? When you get out of Washington, right, and you get out of those kind of ideological silos that we get stuck in here sometimes. Would love for you to piggyback on some of what Alissa just shared about how you think about narrative, how you think about telling stories, and especially ones that maybe frame up policy, but in ways that tap into shared values and lived experience across ideological lines.
Well, I just want to say I love hearing about the idea of lived experience as a important piece of what journalism should be, because I think a lot about lived experience, the role of lived experience and what policymaking should be. And if we really want to build a different kind of world, how we need to shift the relationship between experts as we think of them now and people who are experts in their own lives, and what it means to make the expertise people have about living their own lives a part of the policymaking process and a part of the visioning process. This is delightful to be on this panel because I think we think in some similar ways. I often think about how we need different policymakers sometimes. That's one of the things that Roosevelt invests in, is making sure that we have policymakers from different experiences who can come into the halls of government and do things differently. But the reason I think it's important is because I think for policymaking and for visioning, people's lived experience can give us a sense of moral clarity and urgency that I think, and I say this as someone who's been in government for my entire life, we can lose even when we have the best intentions, when we are working in the details and minutia of policy design, right? We're all here for the right reasons, to build something for people, but then it's very easy to get told no by an economist or a lawyer, to get very caught up in the trade-offs that there might be, and to lose the North Star of what we are looking for. And it is, I think, an incredible source of urgency to remind ourselves of the actual challenges that people are living and the moral imperative on us to find solutions adequate to those challenges. So, a great example from well outside the area of social insurance, but which is my favorite example, is the Fight for 15, the idea of really reimagining the conversation on minimum wage and centering it on not what is the cost-benefit analysis of a minimum wage level versus an economic understanding of what job losses might be, to what is the moral imperative to make sure that people have a living wage that can provide for a decent living? And what would it look like to change our error cost analysis such that we overweighted the lived experience and the goals that we are trying to achieve, and were more skeptical of the expertise that told us there were costs? And you know what? Most of the economics profession ended up changing their mind. And that was the gatekeeper for what should have been understood as a much more weighty moral imperative for what we were supposed to be doing as policymakers. So to me, making sure that we are grounded in places, carefully and thoughtfully, in places of lived experience helps us understand not that there aren't trade-offs, but better weigh those trade-offs in favor of doing the things we came here to do for people.
Yeah, this came up a little bit in a few of the panels today, but most recently in the paid leave panel, right, where Molly was speaking about, yes, we often in Washington index towards what does something cost, but rarely do we ever think about what is the cost of inaction and who's bearing the cost now, right? Because that's actually, there is a cost, it's just not in necessarily dollars and cents in the same way. I want to, Alissa, give you the chance to go to some of the language thoughts you were having. We heard a little bit, and you've been here hearing all the panels today, but we heard a little bit on the healthcare and long-term care panel this morning, for example, Nicole and others kind of reminding us that there have been years and years and years of litigating. What do we call a thing that probably shouldn't be called in, real communities? HCBS or LTSS or any number of letters that people go HCB what, right? But how do we actually like reach people with language that is real and that they see themselves in? What observations and lessons can you bring in terms of how to communicate like real people?
Well, first of all, I want to say I love what Elizabeth was saying about sort of almost like the moral clarity of what people actually need, and starting with that, the people-centered. And that's part of it, right? To have language that's people-centered, that starts with the people. But sometimes I think it's about getting things that are kind of catchy, sort of the Malcolm Gladwell effect. And you can go overboard with that, but I'm thinking of a piece that we ran, which helped coin the term propaganda, which is police propaganda. So that's on a totally different, but I thought, hey, that's something that, and it sort of stuck. In one of my books, Squeezed, I wrote about human infrastructure. And I don't know if I coined it, but it sort of floated out there. And I was writing about automation when I used that phrase, but that it was an argument for human infrastructure. But I do think these kind of phrases that are not the alphabet soup of organizations, even though we love the NASI, the RI, the EHRP, but to try to get to things that are a little more imaginative, that are trying to take back language, take back the language that's now so depleted. And then I also think, part of the thing about having people be experts in their own lives is having the real voice of people show through, and to try to get that into the mainstream press. And that actually is not entirely easy, because often people don't trust the voices of working class people, even though they write about them as objects, not as subjects. And so for us, we've been in EHRP, we sort of have agented a lot of people who haven't been included, whose experiences haven't been included, and have to cut through a thicket sometimes of the co-publishers we work with. We work with these mainstream publishers, Esquire, Cosmopolitan, and they're awfully nice and they're happy to co-publish with us. But sometimes they're like, oh, really? Like they're concerned about writers that are non-traditional, and it's been interesting to try to kind of cut through and capture the fire in the bottle of their voices. Is that the phrase, firefly in the bottle?
I'm going to be annoying. We're just going to not let you talk. But just to piggyback on this, I think it's language, but not just language. As I'm talking to a set of policy makers, I think that we often in policy, we get 90% of the way of designing a policy, and at the last 10%, we go ask a comms person, make up some words to talk about this. And I really think that's the wrong way to do it, that we have to think about language and narrative as a core part of what it means for a policy to work in the first place. So I'll give you like 2 examples.
That's good.
One example is on childcare. There's been a proposal in Congress for a while to say nobody should pay more than 7% of their income for childcare. No one knows what that means. Like literally no one. Like we figured out maybe that was a good idea, that would be sustainable, that is in line with all of our principles about security, et cetera, but like it doesn't mean anything. Something like if we're going to have a contribution, everybody should pay no more than $10 a day. Something that people can actually understand, this is what this means. If we want it to be that instead of, free childcare, if we think that it's important to have a contribution, great. Say it in a way where people understand what it's going to mean for their lives. So that's one thing that's like actually the language. But then there are some times when actually the policy design will affect how you can talk about it, and it is worth changing the policy design because it will be more effective if people understand it. So the example I have, which is very different from social insurance, is when I was at the Federal Trade Commission, I worked on the rule to ban non-compete clauses in labor contracts. So these are contracts that say, you worker, agree not to go work for a competing business or start a competing business for some amount of time and some amount of geography. And we did the work to show that these were anti-competitive, and we were designing a rule, and we had all of these policy choice options. Should we only ban them for low-income people? Should we have a balancing test where you go back and forth? Should we have this? Should we have that? But the truth was, part of what would make this rule work in the first place is if people knew about it. And we had all of this evidence that in states where non-compete clauses are already illegal, they still exist in just as high as a rate in employment contracts as in states where they don't. And for low information workers, it didn't matter. That if they didn't know their rights, then it didn't matter that they had them, right? And so the actual policy design, having a policy that was simple and easy and national and clear, a ban, was not just a communications thing. It was like, how can we do this in a way that will actually be effective, because it will only be effective and remedy the competition problems if people know about it, if it's clear, if it's understandable, and people can take action. So the comms part of it wasn't just the last 10%. It was for this to be effective, for it to resonate with people, for people to take it up, and for people to actually see government as a good actor in their lives that's fighting for them and doing something. We have to design the policy from the beginning with those goals in mind. And then the last thing I was going to say about voices is, again, for all of us policy people, it's not just important for them to be in the media. I truly believe that if we are going to reorient the relationship between people and their government, people need to see their voices written into the language of power. So when we wrote the non-compete rule and we talked about these contracts as being coercive, our final rule was 580 pages, and it included so many stories of workers to illustrate the nature of the coercion, that this was not just a dollars and cents cost-benefit analysis, but it mattered that people were stuck in sexual harassment situations. It mattered that people were stuck in situations where they did not have freedom of liberty. It mattered that people lost wages. And people, we had stories of people who wrote comments into the comment record, into the black hole of the Federal Register, and then saw their stories written into a final rule because we told them that they were there, and but for the court system, would have seen their lives change. And that is the relationship back and forth between people and their government that begins to rebuild trust in democracy.
Whew, we needed a longer space for this panel. That's what I'm clocking right now as I'm thinking about where I want to continue to go. All right, I want to segue us slightly. Okay, before I do it, I have to ask you one more question, Elizabeth, because we were talking in the hallway a little bit about something I want to give you a chance to say, which is that a lot of folks who do this work, especially at places that are in the business of ideas and think tanks, right? It's a word for being in the business of ideas. A lot of those folks may not see themselves as being in the business of anything that has to do with power, but you've used the word power a few times in a different context. How are you thinking about how people who are in the business of ideas, which includes you right now leading the Roosevelt Institute, how do you understand that place in the ecosystem vis-a-vis power?
Yeah. I mean, I see almost everything we do in terms of power. I think, I'll just speak for myself. I think my job is to be in the business of bringing about a better world for people. A world where prosperity and power are shared, a world in which the relationship between our government and our economy is such that we can manage our economy to have a better deal for people. And if that's the case, we need ideas and we need the power to win them. And there are other organizations in the ecosystem that are focused on organizing people, they're focused on coalition building, they're focused on et cetera. But one of the pieces of building power is having ideas that are magnetic and inspiring and that people can see themselves in. So as we do our ideas work, I think it is incumbent upon me and our organization, and I would say all of us, to think about not just what is the policy design that's going to deliver well, that's going to include the people we want it to include, that's going to, draw the lines in all of the right ways, but what are the policy ideas that people are going to see themselves in, that's going to feel responsive to the challenges that they face and that they want to be a part of. We are in a moment of, we're in a fraught moment, we're in a moment where a lot of people are saying no, or where they are feeling defensive. We can't be in that moment forever. We have to some point turn to a moment of building the world we want to be in. And ideas that, as well-intentioned as they may be are uninspiring, aren't going to help us build that power and will and magnetism for the future. And so I think we need to do our ideas. To me, the way that we help build power is in some ways through this narrative work, so that we allow more people to see themselves in the story that we are telling. And in some ways in the magnetism of our ideas and the way we talk about them, such that people are attracted to them, they want to be a part of them, and we do our part as ideas folks to give those power building folks the ideas they need to organize.
Thank you for bringing that in. And okay, so Alissa, I referenced before, and I feel like I would be deeply regretful if I did not give you a chance to talk a little bit about why you have written about tarot, given that you are somebody who works on bringing precarious people's voices into the press. But we got talking about this last night, and I'm not gonna out anybody, but there are a number of people in this room who, I'm gonna be honest, I have taught how to read cards, or I have read your chart, and you know who you are. And I'm curious. So I think there's some people who want to hear this. I'm curious. Why do you think, as you've been observing and as you've been writing about, that more and more people, including left-brainers like brilliant people in this room, might be turning to tarot or other symbolic meaning-making tools in a moment like this? And what is that? How does that connect to the instability, insecurity conversation that you were pushing us into before?
So I wrote a piece about this. That's Rebecca's referencing for WBUR. That was about, so my mom has been ill and I've been caring for her. And I was living with a lot of, uncertainty, like what was going to happen, political uncertainty, and also, kind of caregiver uncertainty, which this is the stuff of this whole conference. And I wanted to start having new stories. And I was like, oh, okay. I went I've never done this. I went into a tarot reading tent when I was on vacation. And this young woman read my tarot, and then I read my cards, and then I started to see a lot of other people who read my, and my joke is if I believe in anything, it's the Criterion Collection. Like, I am the least spiritual person that you can imagine. But I was so interested in trying to create narratives with other people that were, to live in the uncertainty artistically and with comfort, and being open to the unexpected also. So that, and then when I looked into it, I found out, Pew survey, 30% of US adults consulted astrology or tarot cards or fortune teller this year. Tarot cards increased by more than 30% as a search during the pandemic. And I started to see that some of these things like runes and vision boards, I don't know if anybody here is into this stuff, that they're definitely all on the increase. And I think it's not coincidental in the sense that, we are living with such uncertainty that we're trying to manage, that we're trying to cut through the kudzu of political mess and of shifting tides. And so this is, I think, these are the kind of hobbies, I call it wish culture. And I actually think wish culture can be profound. Wish culture can lead to the election of people like Mom Donnie. It can lead to people helping their neighbors in Chicago, cyclists preventing people from, bicyclists organized early in the morning to keep people from being removed by ICE agents. And I thought that, this is a kind of, there's a beauty in this. There's collective joy that's possible in some of these activities that might seem risible. So that's what it was about for me. I think you have a different relationship to tarot, don't you, Vallas?
Oh, you've turned the question around, haven't you? I find these things to be really important tools because they help us connect with the other part of our being, right? The part that isn't the logical left brain, but the part that maybe sees things a little more holistically, the part that might be that spidey sense or the intuition. And that's my sense, is a lot of people are wanting to think with their hearts instead of with their minds right now, and I think that's a good thing. I think there's a Van Morrison lyric that maybe we haven't heard in the playlist today, but if my heart could do my thinking and my head could learn to feel, right? That I think of sometimes about what it takes to actually get policy making right, because it takes not just the heart and the head, but the heart, right? The left and the right brain, if you want to get McGilchrist about it. I'm going to ask you both to close us out with just a little bit of a lightning round, and that is just to ask you, what do you think needs to shift in our cultural or political imagination to build the next era of social insurance? And I'll let you take that anywhere you want to go to sort of tie some of this together.
I think I would say this shift from an old left versus right to a new bottom versus top is really important. And seeing ourselves as agents of that bottom, seeking more power, more agency, and more security is crucial. And not limiting ourselves by being locked in that old paradigm.
I love that. Alissa, you're going to get to close us out.
Yeah, like from a news gathering perspective, I think we need to find stories that appeal to a wide range of people, that point out what's wrong, including pieces on things like financialization. I saw the Times had it by Orrin Cass, who's a conservative. I thought that was incredibly impressive, looking at how financial industries are now most of them are not producing anything and they're not investing in actual things. I think that more people would be organizing around things like that. Data centers is another shared interest that I think a lot of Americans who might not have other common cause are very critical and concerned about data centers in their community. So I guess learning to live with uncertainty and marshaling the ways that insecurity affects us all to create solidarity.
I love that as a note to end on. So please join me in thanking Alissa, Quart, and Elizabeth Wilkins. I wish we had another hour. Maybe I'll make the two of you start a podcast together. We'll help you find some funding. So we're going to close out today, and I'm going to do that very, very briefly, just to say thank you to everyone who has been with us throughout this day. We've done a lot. We've had a lot of far-ranging conversations, and it's been just really wonderful to see so much wonderful engagement and so many people meeting each other who I'm so excited are meeting each other. This has just been really, really fun. And I want to say that as we close out today, I'm just going to say it again because it's true of social insurance and it's also true of this community. We're in this together. This is a heavy time. We're holding a lot. And it feels really good to be in community with so many of you, and to be doing that in person feels like a real privilege. So tomorrow we're going to be turning our focus to the future of social security in the broader context of aging and disability policy, something a lot of you are really leading thinkers on, and it's going to really build on a lot of the conversations today. But before we leave, I just want to say thank you for hanging in there, for being with us to ask some really big and hard questions, and for your leadership in this work. Every single one of us has a role to play in this moment and in this work. I think you've heard it on this panel. I think you've heard it in every single panel today, and we look forward to seeing you back with us tomorrow to keep it up. So everyone, enjoy this evening and hang out with each other some more, and we'll see you tomorrow at 10.